everybody. I'm Donna Terrell, and welcome to Terrell Talk. This is a show where I talk to interesting people, and we talk about interesting subjects. And what I'm talking about today could have a direct effect on you. As you might know, the Arkansas legislature is back in session and dealing with a number of things that will affect Arkansans, from minimum wage, fixing our roads and highways, to how much money we pay our teachers. We can expect lawmakers to work on legislation for the next few months, but with every decision that comes out of the House or Senate, it has to make a stop on the governor's desk. So joining me to talk about all of this and then some is Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Donna. Always good to be with you.
I know you're on a tight schedule, so we'll get right to it. I did want to congratulate you, though, on a second term.
Thank you. We're excited about it.
News today about a tax cut for Arkansans. What can you tell me about that?
Well, I joined with the legislative leadership and announced today the specifics of our plan to lower the income tax rate in Arkansas. As you know, we have a very high rate compared to our surrounding states at 6.9% for individual income taxes. We're going to lower that rate to 5.9% over the next 2 years. Now, set the stage for this. Whenever I first became governor 4 years ago, we lowered it for the middle income, $100 million. And then when we came back in 2017, we had a $50 million income tax cut for the lower income. Now this takes the final phase of this and flattens it for everyone and to 5.9% over the next 2 years. And so we have a very good bill that adds some to the simplification of the tables, but it also is affordable. It can work in with our budget with the growth that we have over the next 2 years.
Well, you talk about middle income. What exactly are we talking about? What income levels are we talking about there?
Well, it's between $20,000 and $75,000 was the first income tax cut. And then the next one was for those lower than $20,000.
Okay.
And so that covered 90% of Arkansans. And so you've got to flatten the rate. Now, obviously there'll be some that say, well, this tax cut is going to those in the higher income categories. Well, that's why we started with our middle income and our lower income first. So 90% have had the tax cut already, continue to enjoy that, and the $50 million goes into effect this year. So this flattens the rate and gives the benefit to all taxpayers to a more competitive rate.
So we're talking $70,000 and above then, correct?
Correct.
Okay, all right. So yeah, because there was a lot of talk. I remember the talk with, especially when you were campaigning, with people saying, well, why not a tax cut for everyone? But bottom line is now there will be a tax cut for everyone under your regime with this last component. Absolutely.
The middle and lower income continue to get the tax breaks that we've already passed. And this does actually lower the rate for even the middle income to one category down to 5.9% as well. So they get a little bit of benefit from it. But the key benefit is that we flatten the rate and everyone benefits when we have a more competitive job environment in Arkansas, tax environment that we can recruit industry, keep capital here, and keep talent here as well.
And keep talent here. Okay. Since we're talking about money, let's talk about minimum wage. In November, Arkansas voters approved the minimum wage, but there's a proposal in the legislature to exempt some Arkansas workers from seeing that increase. We're talking employees who are younger than 18, employers like nonprofits and small businesses. There are some people who argue that and say, well, you know, Arkansans voted for an minimum wage increase, but now it seems like the legislature is trying to take that away in some cases. Your thoughts on that?
I would be concerned about undermining and changing what the voters passed. It is a challenge for nonprofits and small businesses, but also you want to make sure that the job opportunities are available for our young people. So what I would emphasize is that under current law, we've had this long standing, you can actually apply for a waiver if the employee is a student, where you pay 80% of the minimum wage. And so it's a sub-minimum wage for students, and that is a waiver that you can get right now through the Department of Labor. So small businesses, restaurants that are impacted might apply for this, and there's discussion, well, should that be broadened to include others, but it's directed towards students, and I think that's the greatest need there. And so our current waiver is what I would like to see us rely upon and to deal with versus trying to change what the voters put in.
Yeah, because you know, I could see with students, but if you're 18, you've graduated from high school, and now you're out here in the work world, why should you be penalized just because you're 18? You know what I'm saying with that?
Sure, and so this exception that we have right now is only for students, and that could be a student whether you're an older student or an 18-year-old student.
That's a good point.
But if you have to be going to school, there are requirements of that, and so it's a limited waiver that we have. Representative Ballinger's bill is a broader takeaway from the minimum wage that was adopted. So there'll be a debate, but I've talked to Representative Ballinger. I understand where he's going, but I think we ought to be very hesitant about changing what the voters put into place.
Okay. Another issue voters said yes to, casinos in our state. The Arkansas Racing Commission approved draft rules that could actually change some of these things. One proposal involves the letters of support needed from Jefferson and Pope County officials to allow companies to open casinos there. After a change, the rule now says the letter of support would have to come from those in office at the time the casino application is made versus, you know, the initial people who were in office who already signed off on it, who said, you know, yay or nay or whatever the case. Do you think that's fair to change that?
Yes.
You do?
The rule change is very appropriate because the applications will probably come in April, but there also could be applications that come in 2 years from now if each of the 4 are not granted this year. And so at the time the application comes in, there should be a demonstration of support from the elected officials at that time. And so it doesn't make any sense to me that, you know, the previous county judge or mayor that was elected but is no longer in office, it ought to be a contemporaneous expression of support from the community through their elected official, and that's what the rule provides.
Even if that changes things, even if that means, well, no casino for Pope County, even if that were to happen, would you agree with that?
Sure, it's the will of the people. I mean, and as expressed through their elected officials, that is a condition of the amendment that was passed, that there's 4 casinos in these different areas, but in Pope County and in Jefferson County, they have to have the support of the elected official. So it's a conditionary grant of the casinos to those areas based upon the support of their elected officials. We're just simply saying under the rules that it has to be contemporaneous in time to the application that's filed. I think that's perfectly reasonable. I think that gives effect to the amendment, but it also gives regard to the sentiments of the local community.
Okay. When you were campaigning, there were 4 things you wanted to see accomplished in this legislative session. We call them the 4 T's.
That's right.
That's what they're referred to. Transformation of government, taxes. We just talked about tax cuts at the beginning of this program. Transportation and teachers. So let's now talk about teachers and pay raises. It seems to me lawmakers are kind of figuring out ways to raise teacher salaries by $1,000 each year for 4 years. The question is, once you get it to that point, after the 4 years are up, how do you maintain that through the years? And these would be teachers who would qualify at some point for more raises.
That's right. And so, first of all, we recognize that there's going to be some smaller rural school districts that will have a hard time once you raise that minimum teacher salary. And so we're setting aside, I think it's $90 million that would be utilized to assist those districts that might be struggling to meet that minimum salary. So we're helping them to do that. Now, the question is long term, how does that play out? Because these are going to be constant raises in the future. And the answer is that's what we have to look at every year through our adequacy committee as to what kind of increase needs to be done in our education funding from a state level to support our local communities. This, for the first time, actually it doesn't equalize it, but it makes it easier for a smaller school district to compete in salaries and to raise those salaries versus the larger, more wealthy school districts. So I think this is a very positive step forward, and absolutely is the right thing to do to support our teachers. Do a great job. We got to give them raises there.
And I think many people agree with that. I think the fear, though, is after 4 years, what happens and how much of the onus will fall on taxpayers.
Well, it always falls on taxpayers.
That is so true. Don't we know it?
And so, sure, it's a challenge. This is the right balance, though. We've got to put a priority on education, and that's teachers. And so we're funding education every year, and the cost of education goes up every year. So we're putting more of taxpayers' money into it. This priority is for teacher salaries. And you know, it's taxpayers' dollars, whether it's the local school district that puts it into the state. And we have a partnership. So we put in funding for education, but it's also supported by the local tax base. I think we can absolutely make sure with the money we're setting aside that we can meet that obligation to our teachers.
Transportation, one of the 4 T's, funding for roads and highways. I'm hearing the system is needing nearly $480 million a year to meet its current maintenance and improvement needs. You were telling me earlier that this is something you're letting the legislature work on and bring a proposal to you, correct?
Well, I've set some guidelines. You know, I've said that we need to have a new highway funding bill. I said that I think the foundation of it is a referral to the voters of Arkansas to say yes or no on a new highway funding plan. But the legislature has their own ideas. And so they're wrestling around with that, seeing it. The key is, can you get a majority or sometimes a 2/3 vote to pass a highway plan? So we're seeing where the consensus is. The legislature is working this very hard. I'm communicating with them, but hopefully we can come together on a highway plan that the voters will support.
Is this going to be one of the toughest areas, do you think, out of the 4 T's?
I do, but there's always curves in the legislative sessions, but I do think this is one of the toughest because you're talking about a significant amount of money that is needed for highways. Now, you mentioned $480 million, a lot of different figures are out there, and that probably is what is needed to net out to the state, $400 million after you share it with the cities and counties. But that's, in my judgment, too high of a plan. That's too much of a burden on the taxpayers, and so I think we've got to come down and find a little bit more moderate amount that we're going to devote to highways every year. And so that's one of the parts of the discussion. It's not just how you fund it, but also what's the right level of funding. I want to go to a pay-as-you-go system for highways again. The last initiative was a bonding program. I'd like to get to where we actually pay for our roads as we go every year.
As you go, explain that.
Well, rather than going into debt and borrowing or having a bond program, you have the cash that comes in every year through your tax revenues. That's what we're going to spend on roads. Now, that's what we have done historically, and there's nothing wrong. I fully support some bonding programs, but there is some benefit if you take that half-cent sales tax and continue it. Right now we have half-cent sales tax that's bonded for our highways. Let's just take that every year in the future and say, this is how much we're going to spend on highways, the revenue that comes in. And so you're reducing your bonding fees, you're reducing a lot of overhead costs and interest costs. More of the money goes to highways, and it's a steady stream. Do
you agree with Representative Dan Douglas's bill that would basically take taxes, or it could potentially raise taxes on new and used vehicle sales and tires and batteries and all of these things? In the past, you've opposed that sort of thing. Would you go along with that now?
Well, right now we have a sales tax on the sale of batteries and tires and new and used cars. That money goes into our general revenue, which funds education and public safety and all the other needs of the state. And so there's Representative Douglas and others say, well, let's take a part of that and shift it over to highways.
So it's not necessarily costing people more to purchase a new car or used car or tires or batteries. It would just be a shift in funds is what he's proposing.
That is correct, and that seems like a very easy solution.
However.
But, you know, whenever you're looking at $200, $300 million, that kind of shift from education, how do you pay for teachers, that kind of shift from the general revenues, how do you pay for the other needs? And historically, we've had the special excise tax on fuel that pays for our highways. We've got a half-cent sales tax now, but I'd hate to set the pattern permanently for the future that we're going to be shifting revenues that we usually rely upon for education over to highways.
Since we're on the 4 T's, I just want to go back to taxes just for a second, the tax cuts. When will that take effect for the higher income earners?
Under the proposal, assuming it passes, then that would go into effect January 1 of 2020, so it would be next year. Mm-hmm. And that means since the calendar year overlaps with our fiscal year, you're actually only getting 6 months of revenue cut for us. And so even though you're talking about $97 million over 2 years, so that's about $48 million, and you divide that in half, it's about a $25 million hit in our revenue, so it's absorbable into our current budget.
Okay, and you know, and a lot of people have also wondered, though, with cutting taxes when the state seems to need more money for roads and highways and teachers and all of these things, how do you cut taxes at the same time?
Well, it's probably the other T of the initiative, which is transformation. And so you try to do things more efficiently, and so you can conserve the taxpayers' dollars, and we're doing that in our transformation effort. But it's also, you've got to realize that we've got to do a couple things. We've got to be more competitive in our tax rate. I mean, right now, the other states around us are all lower in their individual income taxes, and so it's hard to get talent here saying, well, I don't want to pay that kind of high taxes, and we lose industry that I recruit. I met with, in fact, the first day in office on my second term, I called 6 CEOs of companies across the country, asking them to come and do business in Arkansas. One of the calls that I made, in fact, they were pretty much of a hot prospect, but we're competing with other states on attracting this industry. And they said, our accountants looked at the tax structure of Arkansas and the competing states. It costs us more to go to your state. And so we're going to eliminate Arkansas, we're going to the other state. And so this is an absolutely must if we're going to have growth, new jobs, build the tax base that you need to support education. You have to start with that competitive tax rate and recruiting industry and growing our economy.
Okay. I'm going to kind of move into a different area now. We're going to kind of talk nationally here. President Trump's executive order will allow companies to receive tax breaks if they invest in low-income areas. This kind of it kind of falls in line with what you're talking about, getting more companies, either the ones that are here or new companies, to go into some of these areas where, you know, there is very little growth, as they call them, economic opportunity zones. We have 85 zones in the state. 4, I looked up, 4 are in Pine Bluff alone. Your thoughts on that, and how do you advance this idea?
Well, it's actually a very good provision of the tax cut bill that Congress passed, and it allowed every governor to designate 85 areas. Arkansas had 85 areas for these opportunity zones, which means that a wealthy individual that has capital gains taxes can defer those taxes by investing in the development of a low-income area, a poverty area. And so it is a great opportunity. Now, how do you spur this on and make it happen?
How do you make it happen?
Whenever we designated these areas, I did not want to designate a pasture that will be a pasture 10 years from now, because it has to be an attractive investment option. And so in Pine Bluff, we looked at the downtown areas. We also looked at some areas out at the port. And so we thought these were good areas to attract investment. And so it's a combination of giving an investment incentive, a tax incentive for the investment, but also it has to be a good economic opportunity for them to invest. Pine Bluff has some good potentials. How do you attract those? Just like we're trying to bring industry in, you say, hey, if you invest here, there's an opportunity zone. And so it could be an advantage that we might have in a particular site. Other areas like Hot Springs, the downtown area, there's ripe for investment, so that might attract some. So there's a lot of different areas in the state. We tried to put them in areas that have a good opportunity to attract investors.
Okay. The government shut down for 35 days. Obviously, this is a national issue, not so much a state, but it does affect our state. Do you think, and a lot of people use the term held hostage, and I guess I shouldn't really use that term, but do you think that government workers should be brought into the equation when D.C. is having problems, when Washington's having problems coming to an agreement on issues, whatever that issue may be, in this case, the border wall?
No, it's very frustrating that you've had real live families impacted by the inability of Washington to come together on an agreement on funding. It is the reality of the Washington environment, but it just illustrates that the lack of consensus, the lack of ability of Congress to function and the President to reach an agreement hurts people and hurts our economy. So I hope that we don't repeat this in a couple weeks. I hope that they can, and I think there's a new zeal, at least it appears to me, to work together and to reach out and say we got to make sure we don't do this brinksmanship again, because no one wins by it. It does impact us in Arkansas in some of our programs that we try to implement, but also investment. You know, if we need an air permit for a new industry that comes in and they can't get EPA approval because the EPA workers are on furlough, it slows down investment.
Right.
And so there is a real world impact.
Okay. You're head of the former head of the DEA. Going back to the wall here, drugs enter the country. I know we were talking about, you know, terrorists entering the country or illegal immigrants entering the country, but I want to talk about drugs specifically. They don't just come over the Mexico border. They come from all different areas, wouldn't you say?
Well, that's true. We'll have some drugs come in from Canada. We have drugs come in on flights. But I've been engaged in this for a long time, and if you go back to the 80s, 2/3 of all drugs coming in the United States of America came through the Miami corridor,
so
the Florida and the Caribbean. But then that shifted because of our enforcement efforts there in Miami, and it shifted to the southwest border. And so then 2/3 of all drugs coming in the United States did come through that southwest border of the United States. And that actually is still the pattern today. And so while drugs come from everywhere, there is a specific issue along our border. And so the President is right that we need to have better border security.
Does that mean a wall?
No, it doesn't have to mean a wall. Obviously, we need additional miles of fencing and a wall and physical barriers. But we don't need a wall across every mile of that border, because technology, drones, Border Patrol, there's a lot of different solutions there in some very difficult areas. So you have to be smart about it, but we need to, and our federal delegation is absolutely right, some of that needs to be invested in our E-Verify, our solution for making sure that an employer who hires a worker can verify their legal status in the United States. Because if you slow that down, then you're not going to have that flood coming over, because most of them are coming over here for better jobs, economic opportunities. So there's a lot of things that needs to be done that should enhance border security, which I support, but it needs to be balanced.
Last and final question, and you know, and I thought about this for a long time. I was like, well, okay, what should the very last question be? So I came up with this. LRSD, and you're looking at me like, oh my goodness, what is this question going to be? It's something that I am sure many people in Little Rock would like to know. When will the state hand over LRSD back to the people?
Well, I want to assure everyone that I would love to see that day come, because that means that the children are getting a good education, and that's the first responsibility.
Is the time now? Is it now?
Well, should you base it upon a arbitrary sense as to now's the time, or should it be based upon test scores and knowing that the students are actually getting the education that they need?
Are they not?
Well, when the state took them over, there were 6 schools that were not meeting academic performance. That was down to 3, but there's still 3 schools that the parents who send their children there, they cannot be assured they're getting the education they need. So there's more work to be done academically, but I know that Commissioner Key, and I assure you myself, I want that return to local control, because that's where it can work and people have the best voice. But the Constitution gave the state a responsibility, and we just can't ignore that responsibility.
So bottom line, the time is not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet, but eventually.
I certainly, absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Governor Asa Hutchinson, thank you so much for being here on Terrell Talk. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to let you go because you're a busy man today. Got a big news conference coming up. So anyway, I want to thank you for joining us on Terrell Talk, and look for more episodes. Thanks for being with us. Have a great day or night or wherever it is in the day for you. So long, everybody.